I sat in the fold-up chair I'd bought at a garage sale for $12 and watched my phone fill up with names I hadn't spoken to in 9 days. My mother. My aunt. My mother again. Then my cousin Petra, who only called when something had already caught fire. I didn't answer any of them. 23 minutes earlier, I had forwarded one email. No message attached, no explanation, no subject line of my own. Just the forward. And now the people who had watched my stepfather carry my belongings to the curb in a plastic storage bin. Let me back up, because the night I was told to leave wasn't the beginning of anything. It was just the night my family stopped being careful about what they let me see. I'm Dara Osei. I'm 31 years old. I work as a healthcare records compliance auditor, which means I spend my days inside the administrative skeleton of institutions, tracking documentation chains, flagging irregularities, understanding exactly how information moves and where it goes when people assume no one is watching. It's not glamorous work. But it had given me, without my ever planning it, a very particular set of instincts about paper trails. I had been living in my mother and stepfather's house in Raleigh for 4 months while my lease renewal fell through and I waited for a sublet to open. It wasn't comfortable, but families manage discomfort. Or they're supposed to. My older half-sister, Simone, lived 40 minutes away in a newer development with her husband, Crispin Adeyemi, a civil engineer whose quiet steadiness she had spent 7 years systematically testing. I had always liked Crispin. He was the kind of person who remembered what you'd told him 3 conversations ago and asked about it without prompting. Simone was the kind of person who noticed when rooms paid attention to her and adjusted her performance accordingly. The marriage had been breaking apart for some time. I know that now. What I didn't know, what nobody bothered to tell me, was that Simone had already decided whose name she would use to explain the wreckage. She arrived at the house on a Tuesday evening while I was in the kitchen reheating rice. I heard her voice before I heard the words. That particular pitch, the one she used when an audience was required. By the time I walked into the living room, she was already crying in a way that had clearly been practiced. She told my mother and stepfather that I had been confiding private things to Crispin's brother Theo, that I had encouraged him to share those things with Crispin, that I had been undermining the marriage from inside the family and pretending to be neutral while doing it. My mother looked at me the way people look at something they've already decided to believe is broken. My stepfather, Roland, didn't even look at me. He just said, "This isn't going to work anymore," and went to get the bin. I stood there while Simone watched him, her face doing something careful and grateful that she thought I couldn't see from across the room. I could see it. I didn't argue. I understood in some clear and terrible way that there was no version of that conversation where I won. So I took the bin, called a car, and went to the 1-bedroom sublet I'd been stalling on because the rent was higher than I wanted. I signed the lease from the parking lot. My friend Ren Castellano came over the next afternoon with a box of groceries and the focused energy of someone who had already been thinking about the problem on the drive over. Ren wrote grant proposals for a regional land trust and had a memory for institutional behavior that bordered on uncomfortable. She sat at my kitchen counter and listened to everything I said without interrupting once. When I finished, she asked one question. What was Simone scared of before she decided to be scared of you? I didn't have an answer. But the question didn't leave me alone. I spent the following days going through what I actually knew, not what I felt, not what I suspected, but what I could document. It was the same process I used at work when an audit came back inconsistent. Start with the data that can't be argued with. Build outward from there. Ren had heard something from a colleague who ran in the same nonprofit circles as Simone, something vague about a man named Fletcher Obi, who coordinated regional health initiatives and had been spending considerable time with Simone at a series of planning retreats over the previous year. It was gossip, barely even that. But I'd learned to treat gossip the way I treated flagged files at work. Not as truth, but as a direction. What I found when I looked carefully was that Simone had been building something before the accusations. A narrative with my name already written into it, constructed before the divorce proceedings were formally filed. One of Crispin's cousins, someone I barely knew, had received a call from Simone 3 weeks before that Tuesday evening, asking leading questions about whether I had been speaking privately with Theo, whether anyone had noticed me being too involved in their marriage. She was testing the story before she told it. That was the shape of it. Not panic. Not grief. Preparation. The email arrived on a Thursday morning while I was reviewing a contract amendment at my desk. I had sent a careful inquiry 2 weeks earlier to the administrative contact for a mid-sized hotel outside Raleigh, the kind of boutique property that catered to conference groups and discreet weekend travel. I had reason to believe, because of how reservation notification systems work, something I understood from a hospital systems audit I'd run the previous year, that my personal email might have been erroneously retained as a secondary contact on a reused booking profile tied to a regional wellness conference I had helped coordinate 18 months earlier. I had asked plainly and professionally whether any administrative correspondence had been misdirected to me as a result. The reply confirmed it. My address had remained attached in error to a reused corporate reservation profile. Attached for my correction and records were the administrative notices generated before the oversight was identified. I opened the attachment. I read it twice. Then I sat with it for 4 minutes without moving. 2 rooms. Adjacent. 3 separate bookings across a 6-month window. Fletcher Obie's name on one reservation, a corporate alias on the other, that traced through the billing contact back to an account Simone used for a wellness consulting side project. Check-in times logged within 40 minutes of each other. Late checkout requests on file. It wasn't a weapon. It was a record. And records don't perform. I forwarded it to Ren first. She called within minutes, and all she said was, that's why she needed someone else's name on the fire. I went to see Simone that evening. She opened the door to her townhouse in a gray cardigan, collected, already composing her expression into mild inconvenience. I didn't ease into it. I want to know why you used my name before anyone thought to ask you what you were covering. She laughed, a short dismissive sound. You've been talking to Crispin. I held up my phone with the attachment open. The composure didn't collapse. It just went somewhere else, somewhere internal and calculating. Her eyes moved across the screen and back to my face. Where did that come from? From the hotel, I said. You reused an old booking profile and forgot to remove my contact from the back-end system. They corrected the error and sent me the records. She tried 3 different registers in the next 2 minutes. Denial, then wounded dignity, then a pivoting offense about privacy. I let each one finish. Then she said something that closed the last door I'd been keeping slightly open. I needed it to land somewhere that wasn't me. Not I was desperate. Not I made a mistake. I needed it to land somewhere. I left without responding. Halfway to my car, the calls started. Simone, then my mother, then Roland. I drove home in silence and opened my laptop. The email I composed that night was 3 paragraphs. It named the accusation, cited the administrative correction, attached the records with a brief explanatory note, and closed with one sentence: I am not available to continue absorbing blame that was built to protect someone else's choices. I sent it to my mother, Roland, and Crispin. The responses came in under 10 minutes. Simone, please don't send that to anyone else. My mother, we were wrong. One chance. Please. Roland, this needs to stay between us. Crispin called an hour later. He was quiet on the phone, and his voice had the texture of someone who had been carrying a long suspicion and had just been handed permission to stop doubting it. He said, You didn't deserve any of this. Not thank you, not relief, just a plain acknowledgement of a plain fact. His attorney, he said, would be in touch. 3 days later, I was at my desk when my director appeared at my office door. She said she'd heard there was some personal matter that might be brushing against some of the professional networks I moved through. She said, if anyone tries to make that your problem here, refer them to me. I held it together until she left. Weeks passed. The sublet, which I had once thought of as a stopgap, began to feel structurally sound. I bought a floor lamp. I learned the particular silence of the building after 10 p.m. and stopped expecting it to mean something was wrong. Ren came over and we painted the kitchen wall a dark, deliberate green. The color she said meant It was honest, more honest than I expected from her, and it almost reached the level of an apology. I listened to it twice and did not call back. My stepfather sent a text asking if we could talk. I read it and put my phone face down and made coffee. Simone came to my door once, alone in the early evening, without her armor on. She said things that sounded like understanding but were shaped like requests. She wanted me to soften Crispin's position. She wanted to know if I would let the whole thing quiet down. She said, "I'm still your sister." I said, "You were. Until you decided my name was easier to spend than your own." She left angry. Anger, at least, was real. It meant something had finally reached her that her performance couldn't absorb. Here's what I know now that I didn't know that Tuesday night with my belongings in a bin on the curb, the documents didn't create the truth. They just made it so the people who had been choosing to ignore it couldn't keep doing so in comfort. The email from the hotel was a billing correction, a bureaucratic hiccup, an administrative oversight no one planned. But it landed at the exact intersection of what was hidden and what had been done to me, and it turned out that intersection was the only address that mattered. My mother apologized, eventually in the way people apologize when the alternative has become more uncomfortable than contrition. It was not nothing. It was also not enough, and I no longer felt obliged to pretend the difference wasn't real. I still live in the sublet. I'm renewing the lease. I sleep well, which I didn't for a long time, and I've stopped calculating the distance between where I am and where I thought I'd be. There's a question I've been sitting with since all of it settled, and I'll leave it here. When an apology only arrives after proof makes silence impossible, when people come back to you not because they saw clearly but because they got caught, does that still count as love? Or is that just fear finally learning your name?